The people were eating out of the garbage cans, sleeping on the street, any place that they could sleep. They had a blanket they could spread in the bus station, train station. They would spread it in a corner, any place they could see. That's where they would spend the night. With no money.
I had heard this commotion out in the hallway one time, and it was winter, and this family was being evicted out of the building. They had 2 children, and we used to play with the kids, and they were the same age. And I went downstairs with my cousin, and here was all their furniture out on the sidewalk, right on the edge of the street, not on the street, but right on the curb, where people could still walk by. But there, I remember seeing their dressers and their couch and different pieces of furniture, and the 2 kids were sitting up on top of one of the dressers, and it was snowing. And I said, my mom came down, and I said, Mom, what's going on? And she said, well, they couldn't pay the rent, you know, they got evicted. We suffered a little bit in the Depression for lack of food. Food was scarce. The 4 adults weren't working. My mom found a job working in a hot dog stand, and she was able to bring some of the buns home, and once in a while some of the hot dogs. But my uncle did menial labor now and then, and he was able to bring home some food. I can remember my uncle getting some of the older potatoes from the Mark guy downstairs that we got to know, and bringing them up and making a potato pancake for us. And we were lucky to get an onion in it ground up, but he would make a good potato pancake. And us cousins would sit on a towel on the center of the living room floor. We didn't have much furniture, and that's what we had to eat for the whole day.
In the city, you had to buy everything you eat. Everything you eat, you had to buy.
We're all probably familiar with these stories and images from the Great Depression. But it's an often forgotten fact that many of these heart-rending accounts have a common denominator: location.
The city, but they had food lines, and people would have to, I don't know how often they went or what they got, but it kept them alive, and we didn't have that problem. We always had things on the shelf, and even now when I shop, I got more on the shelf than I probably, eat.
We were a very poor Depression family, but we lived on a farm, and we had food, and they canned. And I can remember them getting up in the middle of the night to put wood in the fire, always on a wood stove. They're just, as poor as we were a very self-sufficient, happy family.
What would happen to this nation if some event or series of events plunged it into a depression like 1929? What would be different now? Would it hit us harder than it hit them? Are we more vulnerable than they were? Back in the Depression era, a little more than half of America lived in an urban area, a city. Now that number has skyrocketed to around 80%. And as a sure result, we become much more dependent for our necessities of life. Take food, for instance. During the Depression, 1 out of every 5 people in the workforce were involved in agriculture. Now the number that produce our food is only slightly more than 1%. At first blush, this appears to be a good thing. But the only way this has happened is through major dependence on heavy equipment, fuel, chemicals, and other products which may or may not be available to the farmer in hard times. Without these modern devices and products, would our food system be able to produce enough food for the more than 300 million people in this country? And even if the farmers can produce enough food, are we assured that it will make its way to our grocery shelves and that we will be able to buy it?
And you need to know that in our large cities, there's about 3 days' supply of food. Now, those supermarket shelves may look really full, and they are, because when you're taking it off, the clerks are stocking the shelves. And if they didn't stock the shelves just at the rate that you take it off without a panic, all those shelves will be empty in about 3 days, because the trucks need to keep running to keep those shelves full. What if the trucks didn't run? There are a number of things that could bring about situations where there could be really serious civil unrest in the cities.
Manufacturers, they make to order. And so when the order comes in, that's when they manufacture. A lot of manufacturers just don't warehouse anymore. Again, that's money. So having product tied up in a warehouse is money sitting there. And they aren't to tie up their money like that. The stockholders don't like to see that. But that supply, if you had a disaster anywhere in one of these major manufacturing areas, it would stop the trucks, it would stop trucks coming in with the supplies, it would stop trucks from going out to supply your major chains. And the major chains have their warehouses, and again, that product is turning over and over daily. And so it's not like they have half their warehouse full of flour. Flour has a certain slot within that warehouse. And to keep flour in that slot, they have to have trucks coming in all the time to replenish that. So you stop those trucks, you stop the supply of products to the stores. You know, one of the things I think of is in the event of a disaster, what do people do? They flock to the stores. They buy up all their staples and water. So your store will be empty faster than it's ever been empty before.
Unfortunately, though, food is not the only problem.
Beyond the well-known issues of air pollution and water pollution, I think today an even larger concern relate to the political and the social arena. I think we have all, as Americans, have been aware since 9/11 that the cities are going to be the targets for terrorists. The terrorism involves not only destructive weapons, but bioterrorism.
One of the experts in this area, who was in the Pentagon, this was about 8-10 years ago, told me that if the average citizen knew the potential for mischief in this area, that they'd be really frightened. Just one little example is smallpox. Nobody's vaccinated for smallpox, and I have a scar for smallpox, but only people who are near my age, I'm 82, my next birthday, are going to have a scar for the smallpox vaccination. And as the smallpox got loose, and there were only two sources of that organism. One was in the Soviet Union and one was in this country. And I am told with considerable assurance that the one in the Soviet Union has gotten loose, and it's now in China, it's now in a lot of different countries.
A rural area is not a fruitful area for terrorism. The terrorists are going to be looking for the biggest bang for their buck they can get, the highest yield of death. And that's exactly why they mention such things as malls and stadiums, and where there are going to be large concentrations of people. But there are other major biological threats outside of terrorism. The most recent example, of course, was the bird flu. And while I was at the Hanford site, we were making preparation for what we would do if there were massive outbreaks of the bird flu. And at that point, we were even planning on how we would handle the large number of people who could possibly become infected. The fact that the hospitals would immediately be overwhelmed. What buildings and sites could we use to quarantine perhaps hundreds of people? And what we would do as a medical team to deal with this public health national emergency and crisis. And so there again, outside of anthrax, this has been another recent lesson for us to look at where it's very much a possibility and not just something of science fiction.
The more people there are around, the faster this epidemic will spread. If you're not in the cities, you're just by distance and space, you have some meaningful measure of protection.
As disconcerting as bioterrorism and the pandemic threat is, one factor has contributed more to the utterly dependent state of this nation than any other: electricity.
If you just think today about the world we live in and all of the creature comforts we have, you will recognize that essentially none of them would be there without electricity. It is the power source for almost everything out there. You can't communicate. If the electrons don't flow in your car, the gasoline won't explode in the cylinders and you won't go down the road. So if you cut off the flow of electrons in our world today, it's just a whole different world. And the grid upon which we depend for almost everything is very vulnerable. It is just at the tipping point is the way that the experts will characterize it. Our demand has grown, and the grid has grown just barely enough to keep up with demand. And it is really almost a Rube Goldberg kind of thing. And the least little perturbation can bring parts of the grid tumbling down, as happened in Florida not very long ago. The great Northeast blackout of several years ago. A tree limb fell on a wire out in Ohio and caused a great blackout half a dozen years or so ago. Any little thing can bring down large parts of the grid. It is very vulnerable to terrorists. I am told that there are a dozen substations in the country that are so critical to the function of the grid that if terrorists took out those dozen substations, the grid would come down. And could have events in the future where the power grid will go down and it's not in any reasonable time coming back on. For instance, if when the power grid went down, some of our large transformers were destroyed, damaged beyond use. We don't make any of those in this country. They're made overseas, and you order one, and 18 months to 2 years later, they will deliver it. Our power grid is very vulnerable. It is very much on the edge. Our military knows that. And sometimes it's very difficult to do what they call a black start. That is, to start without electricity. Many of the things that produce electricity need electricity to start them spinning. And if you don't have electricity, how do you do that? They call it a black start. And many of our big power producing turbines and so forth cannot do a black start. They've got to have electricity from somewhere else to charge them and get them spinning so that they can then start making electricity. If you go do a Google search and go on the web, this isn't some strange knowledge that the Congress has and nobody else has. It's out there. This is pretty widely known that our grid is very vulnerable. And if you just think about all the things that are important in your life, how many of them wouldn't be there if the grid has gone down? You can get some measure as to what the world is going to be like, what your country is going to be like, what your community is going to be like if we don't have power. So there are a number of events that could create a situation in the cities where civil unrest would be a very high probability. And I think that those who can and those who understand need to take advantage of the opportunity when these winds of strife are not blowing to move their families out. I'll tell you something else about this. It's just plain fun. When you're looking at the challenge of what do I have to do so that I'm independent of the system.
But I think that you have to have, you would have to have some like farming skills. You should be out on your own little piece of land or with several friends or something, and raise your own food, have your own fruit trees, and have your, your water system, and how you're going to get along if all these utilities are cut off,
The banking situation, when this thing all falls through, we're going to have to be ingenious in making things work and dependent upon God. Because when this thing falls through, there won't be anything to rely on. I read a book one time that said that when this thing happens to this country, all financial support will be taken away from us. There'll be no financial support. We have to learn how to live without money. And the guy in the country is the one who's going to do this. People in the city are going to be cutting each other's throats. Well, there are cutthroats now, but your garden in the city is not going to be yours. It's going to be everybody's. So we'll be like kings and queens living out in the country where we can have a garden to supply our family's needs.
It says here, warning, this book is the property of the United States government. It is unlawful to sell it to any other person or to use it or permit anyone else to use it, except to obtain ration goods in accordance with regulations of the Office of Price Administration. Cooperate with your local salvage committee. I don't believe this is over. I believe that in the future, because what I saw happen in Katrina, in New Orleans with Katrina, I think that was a wake-up call to people that live in the cities. Those that have their eyes open and are listening and maybe reading their Bible will understand what is going to happen in these cities. Things are going to happen that are going to be a lot worse than what happened in New Orleans. I believe we'll go back to rationing of some kind, and at that time, I would want to be living in the country with fruit trees and a garden and have my food and water sure.
So I think that provident people who understand, who have a responsibility to their families, will be looking more and more to getting out of the cities. And it's a huge challenge. There's no exhilaration like the exhilaration of meeting and overcoming a big challenge. You stop and think about, gee, what do I need to do so that I can be independent out there? That if the world fell apart, it really wouldn't matter for me and my family. That's really an interesting challenge. By the way, one other reason for doing this is it's a really patriotic thing to do. Because for all of our citizens who aren't dependent on the state when an emergency happens, we're going to be stronger and stronger, aren't we? So as a member of Congress, I'm concerned. I would like everybody to do this. I would like everybody to have a year's supply of food. I'd like everybody to have some plan so that they can make do if any one of these emergencies occurs. But it's going to be easier to do that. And you'll avoid the problems of civil unrest if you're out of the cities and out in the country.
We need to get out.
A storm is coming, relentless in its fury. Are we prepared to meet it? Many feel that a viable solution to hard economic times includes relocating to the city. But not everyone is moving into town these days. A counter-migration out of the cities is now in full swing. Not of the same magnitude that has populated them during the last century, but a growing migration nonetheless. What could have precipitated this? The reasons are as many and varied as the people who have been impacted by them. They come from all walks of life, but their goal is the same: looking for a better way to live, getting back to their roots. While difficult times surround us on every hand, they are seeking to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. This is their story.
We bought the property here in the fall of 1980, and that same fall we built the cabin. As a matter of fact, we started building the cabin before we closed on the property. At that time it was solid woods here, there was no lake in, and we had to walk through a little path kind of to get down here, and most of the lumber was carried in on a cart. It was a very dry year. We didn't know that. But it was a very dry year, and we had a little trailer we pulled behind the car to bring the material in. The next year, for 10 years after that, you couldn't drive in because it was very wet. Now, of course, we have a good stone road coming in. When we first came to the mountain here and preparing to build our house, we were staying in a tent. And I noted that, gee, wouldn't it be nice if we had a little cabin to stay in rather than a tent? I originally hadn't planned on one quite this large, but that's how it came out. When I built this in 1980, it cost just about $1,000 to build the cabin. And it was livable. We lived in here for quite a while, really. And then we built our house, and the cabin was kind of left deserted, and the mice moved in, and it was a question of whether we would continue to maintain the cabin or simply tear it down. Then my wife said, gee, why don't we rehab the cabin? And so we did that. It's really a very interesting challenge to try and build as much livability as you can into something as small as this. This is 16 by 20 feet, and it will sleep 10 people, every one of them in a bed. One of the beds is here. It's the kind of a thing that you have in a motorhome, a bit larger than you have in a motorhome, and the table goes down to form the bottom of the bed, and the cushions slide out, and so you have a pretty much a full-size bed there. The center, of course, in any cabin like this is the cook stove, and you see that here. And as they say, it does 4 things for you. It cooks your food, and it bakes your bread, and it warms your house, and it heats your water. In a moment we'll go around to the other side so we can see how it heats your water. Of course, in the summertime, even here on the mountain where it's quite cool and you don't need air conditioning, you still don't want a fire in your stove. And so we have a little propane stove here. As long as propane is available, why, we will do our cooking in the summertime on that propane stove. And in the cabinet under it is a 20-pound cylinder, which should pretty much last you quite a long while in the summertime with the limited cooking that you would do. Let's walk around to the corner here and see the heating system. There is in the firebox in the stove here, there is a stainless steel U-tube. And you can see the stainless steel U-tube here. And this is called a thermosiphon system. And out the back of the stove are 2 pipes. One is the bottom of it, which brings the cold water in. And the other is the top of it, where the hot water runs out. This is the cold water, this is the hot water, and you can feel a big, big difference in temperature. And hot water is lighter, and it rises, and cold water is dense, and it falls. And there's a tank upstairs, which we'll look at in a few moments, and that stores the hot water. Now, it does not have a cover on it, so we can see how the tank works. You could either leave it uncovered if you want the heat up there, or if you want to maintain more hot water, you would put covers on the tank, and we have 2 covers here to put on the tank. The water system in the house is this a special kind of a cistern pump. If we open this valve and close this one, then we're pumping out of a spring, which is under the house here, under the cabin. And if we close this valve and open this one, we're now pumping up to a storage tank in the attic through this hose. And when the storage tank is full, it's not quite full now, but when the storage tank is full, why the excess water will run out here, and you know the storage tank is full. So a little exercise in the morning, and then you have running water all the rest of the day. Because we're pumping water up, a bit of force is needed. We built a little extension here that we could put onto the where you can pump more easily. And now you've got some leverage, and so you can easily pump the water up to the storage tank, which is up in the gable, right up in the very top of the cabin here. There's a little refrigerator here, and be very careful in refrigeration when you're out in the woods like this with power that you're getting from the sun or from a wind machine. And we looked and looked until we found one that had a very high efficiency. It's very small. It's very interesting how small a refrigerator you can get by with. If you think about your refrigerator at home, they really ought to make refrigerators. They're only about 6 or 8 inches deep, because that first 6 or 8 inches that you use, and the rest of it, you just store food in it until it gets old enough that you have a clear conscience and you can throw it out. So with a small refrigerator like this, you don't have that problem, because everything in it is going to be usable because it's small. If you plan your meals, you won't have all that much left over, and so a refrigerator that size will serve quite adequately. Let's take a look next at the Murphy bed here. This doesn't have the springs and stuff in it, but it's light enough that it doesn't matter. It's easily manageable. Well, maybe we ought to go upstairs. To get upstairs, there's no stairway here. There's a ladder on each end, because there's a bedroom on each end, and you'd like some privacy. I'd like first to look at the water system here. This is the hot water storage tank. As I put my hand on it, I can barely hold my hand on it. We've had a muted fire down there that will get so hot you can't hold your hand on it. Now we have 2 blankets that you can put around that, the regular blankets for insulating around your hot water heater. If it's cold wintertime, you want heat upstairs here, you might not want the blankets on it. They easily come on and off. Just leave this here. Now it's a big radiator. Be assured that that stove will produce more hot water than you need. As a matter of fact, you can have a luxury bath every night and you still will have hot water left over. The pressure for the system is this tank right above us here. And the cabin was just large enough I can get the tank in and walk under it, as you can see. And this you fill by pumping up from the kitchen sink down there with that unique kind of a cistern pump that we have down there, which is also a force pump. I also have in the basement, which we'll go into a little later, a electric pump down there. But I'll tell you, it's very comforting to know that you can live well without electricity, because it might not always be there. And so we have the force pump down there, and I have not used the electric pump yet to fill the system. Let's look at the beds here. 4 can sleep. We built this for our sons, and their friends would come down with them, and so we can sleep 1 here, and we can sleep 2 in the bed under it, and we can sleep 1 in the bed over here, so you can sleep 4 here. I want to show you something very unique about under the bed. And let me pull this out. Oh, those are the 2 blankets for the, but notice how big that drawer is. There's no dressers here, but you have more space in these drawers than you would have in dressers, because there are 3 drawers under this one. And if I pull the drawer out from the other side, that drawer will be even longer. See how deep the drawer is. It goes back still further than this. So there's more storage space under these beds than you would have with conventional dressers in a bedroom. In a small cabin like this, very much like a motor home, you've got to make sure that you use all available space as efficiently as you can. We also have a half bath up here. The bedroom here was the bedroom that we stayed in for a number of years while we built the house. And it has larger than the standard bed here. It is as wide and a bit longer than a standard bed. I just want to show you again one of these enormous drawers underneath. In addition to the shelves there for storing things, we have these drawers, and it pulls out and out and out. See how large the drawer is. These have a very interesting, it's like Teflon nylon material under the drawer. There are no slides, but it really slides quite easily. And you can feel the air coming out because it fits in a pretty tight box. You can feel the air coming out as you shut the door. But it opens and shuts very easily. This is where you come up. As you see, it takes no floor space. I'm walking here on the little trap door. You open that up, and there is the ladder that goes downstairs. Our pioneers frequently had in their house a secret place that it wasn't obvious it was there. It wasn't intended that our cellar, our basement would be that way, but it turned out that way. If you move this wood box back like this and set this kindling box on top of it and move the rug, we will open up into the basement. The house is built over a spring, and you'll see the kind of a basement floor that we put in to accommodate that. Let me go down now into the basement and turn the light on, and then we will move down into the basement so we can see what's there. We're now down in the basement. I'd first like to note that wherever you're building over anything that's going to be damp, always use treated wood. It has two advantages. One is it's treated and it won't rot. The second advantage is, in the east at least, it's always a southern yellow pine, which is a very tough wood, so you're going to get more strength from the same size board. So this is all treated. We also have a rigid insulation here, which serves somewhat as a vapor barrier, because it's going to be moist down here. If you're going to use this as a root cellar, you want it moist, and here you see some shelves where you could use this as a root cellar. Since I dug all of this out by hand, I simply dug down as far as what's convenient and then put shelves in. It's a whole lot easier to store things on a shelf than it is the floor anyway. You're not leaning over to pick it off of the floor. This is interesting here. There was a stump here, and it was going to be very difficult to get the roots out, and so I just built around it. The black that you see there is 20 mil PVC, and this is a pond liner or swimming pool liner, and I put this here to protect the spring because we're built over a spring. You can see an electric pump back there that I mentioned earlier. I've never used that pump. I always simply use the hand pump, and you can see there the hose going up for the hand pump. By the way, at the bottom of I have a one-way valve down in the spring, so to drain the system, you'll see a little silcock there. And when it's going to freeze, I simply put a bucket under that, and I get out maybe a quart or so of water that runs out of that hose up to the pump. This can be conveniently used as a root cellar. We protect the spring by putting the PVC over it, and then to protect the PVC, this floor is just loose laid half-inch treated plywood. If you have the luxury of having a spring above you, by all means capture that spring and have automatic gravity flow. We didn't have that option here because the spring was right down here where we were building our cabin. So we did the next best thing. We built the cabin over the spring. And originally we had a simple little cistern pump, and they cost, well, I bought one for $19.95 recently. If you buy them on sale, they're really very cheap. If you're not pumping it up to a tank like we have in the attic, they serve very well. And you simply pour a little water in them, and they are kind of self-priming, and you can pump out. And when we lived in the cabin here, that's what we used. But if you can't have gravity flow, which is certainly desirable, capture the spring above you, flow down by gravity, then you automatically have pressure. Do the next best thing, build over the spring. And what we do here is so that you have the convenience of running water for your day. After the inconvenience of having to pump it up in the morning, we'd simply have that tank, which you saw earlier up in the attic, which stores the water, and then everything runs by gravity from that. So during the day when you're using it, it's gravity flow, and you simply turn the faucet on, the water comes out. You're not going to get the explosive pressures that you have in the city where you're running 60, 80 pounds pressure. Here we're running, it's a half pound per foot, and we're 5 feet, so we have 2.5 pounds pressure. But the water does flow, and you can take a shower, and you do get enough water to wash your hands and so forth. By the way, if you aren't familiar with root cellaring, you really do need to become familiar with that. Our forefathers used that extensively. You go to Europe today, you go to Russia particularly, and they just don't trust the system. And they aren't sure that there's going to be food on the shelves all winter. And so whether you're rich or you're poor, you probably have a dacha. And you go outside the city, and if you're have some means, you will have a nice summer home there, but you will grow your garden there. And if you're poor, you'll have something there that's not much bigger than the 2 by 4 feet in which you store your hand garden tools. But everybody that I know in Russia has a dacha, and they raise their food, and they use root cellars, and they pickle it, and they dry it. There are all sorts of techniques you can use to preserve your food. We don't really think of those today because it's so convenient to go to the supermarket. But you know, you're planning because the supermarket may not always be there. And we'll show you a little later a root cellar that's built into one of the other homes here on the lake. And you'll see the potatoes that were put in there last fall. They come out this spring, not even a sprout on them. And nobody was living in the house all winter. The house is just being built, but yet the potatoes were perfectly, in fact, you can plant them. You never need to buy seed potatoes. Our forefathers didn't buy seed potatoes. There weren't any to buy. They kept their potatoes in a root cellar, and when spring came, there were the potatoes, and they could go out and plant them. So it's a self-perpetuating kind of thing. And what you really need to do is to plan so that in an emergency, you could do that. It may be convenient to go to the store and buy the seed potatoes, but you know, you will always have next spring, if you have a root cellar, you will have potatoes which will have made it through the winter, which you can use for seed potatoes the next spring. This is the downstairs bathroom. This bathroom is quite small because it's in a cabin which is only 16 by 20 feet. On this end is a lavatory. The tub is obviously recycled from a motor home. Okay, let's take a look now at the rest of the accessories of the cabin. Obviously you need a wood supply, and we have designed the wood supply so that it is accessible without going outside. A little greenhouse on the cabin here with the windows facing south. And there are 3 cords of wood stored here. And that 3 cords of wood should be more than enough to last for a full season in heating in the cabin. And then next is a little shop here. And it's amazing how convenient and necessary a little shop is. This is really very rudimentary. It has just a basic economical skill saw and a sliding miter saw, vise, and a grinder. And the last little thing I need in here is a simple drill press. And then next is a barn in which one time we had chickens and goats. Now it's primarily storage. In the wintertime, it's very inconvenient to go outside to get wood, which is covered with snow and ice. It's very nice to have it under cover. It's even nicer if you don't have to walk outside to get it. So something which is attached to your cabin that has the wood in it with a covered walkway to get in the door is very convenient. And then when you have something like this, there's not only do you need the shop when you're building it, but there are always things you will need to do, and a simple shop setup like this will pay for itself many, many times over. As you can see from the construction here, very little expense was involved in this. Matter of fact, this barn is built out of local rough-sawn lumber. It's built out of white pine. It may seem strange to build a building out of white pine, but it's a very common material here in the mountains, and so this came from a local sawmill. Of course, anything that touches the dirt is treated wood. The white pine will rot in a couple of years if it touches dirt. So make sure that anything that touches dirt is treated wood.
us to it.
Hello, welcome to our country home. Why don't you come on in? Well, we started praying about moving to the country about 4 years ago. And we had been to a family camp meeting for several years, and we had seen the benefits that other people had derived from moving to the country. And I remember reading the Country Living pamphlet. And one thing that really struck me in that pamphlet was that it was 10 times easier to raise your children in the country than it is in the city. And I thought, well, you know, why wouldn't I want to take advantage of it being 10 times easier? I mean, it's hard raising children, you know, even if you have good children, it's a hard job. And so we talked it over as a family, and we decided it was something that we wanted to do. So we started praying, as I said, and you know, I knew from reading the counsel that it was what the Lord would have us to do, and that really set the tone for our attitude, I think, because if you know that you're in the Lord's will, then it's easy to go forward. And for us, we knew that it was an advantage for our family to live in the country like it is for every family. And so we started praying, and we prayed for quite a while, and then we decided, you know, we know that the Lord will lead us and He will do His part, but we also need to do our part. So we started thinking, what can we do to get ready to move? So we started having garage sales, and we started weeding through our possessions. We decided we needed to simplify because we would most likely be moving to a smaller home. And so we started going through our things, and I actually had to kind of put the brakes on my daughters because they were ready to get rid of everything. So we, like I said, had garage sales, and we just had that mindset that it wasn't if the Lord would move us to the country, it was when. And so we prayed, we looked at property online, we talked to other people that had made the move, and you know, just really the key, I think, was to keep praying and keep believing that in His time that the Lord would do it for us too.
Alrighty, this is our woodshed, and as you can see, we've got our winter supply of wood in. And we had some friends and neighbors help us get our wood in, but we did a lot of this ourselves. And it was a new experience for us. We had never used a chainsaw before, but we learned how, and this is the result, the fruit of our labor.
One thing that I really appreciate about our move to the country is we took some time off from homeschool when we first moved here because we were building or helping to build the house. Our house was actually built by friends, people that actually we didn't really know till we moved here, but became friends with. They also are members of our church. And there were opportunity for us to help as well. So we, I think the first thing we did was stain the siding. And that was quite a big job. And we also helped insulate the house, which was a very itchy job. And we learned how to pull wire. We didn't, you know, do all the electrical work, but we learned how to install the sockets and pull the wire. And trying to think of what else did we do.
This is a project that my daughters and I worked on earlier this fall, and we'd never done any kind of siding before. We had stained all the siding for our house and our garage, but we hadn't actually put any up. But some friends were nice enough to show us how to do it. And so we took on this project, and we are not quite done yet, but we learned how to do it, and we had fun doing it, and we found out that we were capable of doing something that we'd never done before.
I don't know, it was just it was a real education in and of itself to build the house. And that's something, you know, we wouldn't have had the opportunity for before, but to be hands-on on the job site every day, it was a great learning experience for Emily and Ashley, and you know, for myself as well, but especially for them to see what it takes to build a house from the ground up. And you know, although we discontinued our formal education at that time, I think the education they got was invaluable. And anytime you work together as a family, it's something that you can't compare to any book learning or you know, the traditional learning. It's something that we all grew together. We had our moments of frustration and times that things seemed hard, but we also learned that we're capable of a lot more than we ever thought too. One thing that we really enjoy since we moved here to the country, like I think we mentioned earlier, was learning new things. And one thing that we've learned how to do is can. This year we canned peaches and pears and salsa. And Emily and Ashley have more time now that we are out here in the country. Sometimes when they're not doing school, they'll be working in the kitchen with me or even on their own. They'll make bread and make salad for dinner, or they've both done more cooking since we moved to the country, definitely, than when we lived in the city. When we were considering a move to the country, when I was praying about it, there were several things that I prayed for more than just the move. And one of them was that we would move somewhere in the mountains. I've always enjoyed the mountains and the woods. And so that was one prayer. I also prayed that wherever we moved, that we might know at least one other family, that we weren't completely out in the middle of nowhere all by ourselves. And I also prayed that wherever we moved, that there would be godly men, that I guess more godly husbands and fathers that Emily and Ashley would have as role models, because you know, it's just the three of us. We don't have that influence in our life day in and day out. And I prayed that we would live in a place where I would be able to continue to homeschool them. The Lord really blessed us in our life that once I decided that homeschooling was something I would like to do, again, I felt there was an obstacle because I was a single parent that had to work full time. And the Lord opened up a way for me to take Emily and Ashley to work with me every day. And they homeschooled for almost 4 years in my workplace. And you know, that alone was a huge miracle. And I think that knowing that God worked that miracle for us made it all the more easy to believe that He'd worked the miracle of moving us to the country as well. So, you know, I prayed all these different prayers, and the Lord blessed, and He answered all of those prayers in this one move that we made to the country. So, you know, I think we limit Him sometimes by our lack of faith. And I would encourage anyone that's thinking they would like to move to the country, it doesn't matter what the obstacle is, because God is bigger than any obstacle you can even think about. So, you know, I would just encourage people to pray and trust Him and know that He will do what He says He will do. And He's obviously interested in our best good, and if our best good is for us to be in the country, He will make it happen.
$64.2 DC volts. 64.2. It'll probably dance around a little bit, but that's free electricity, and that is exciting. Why is it free electricity? Because this 64.2 volts DC is coming from that big fiery ball in the sky that God created. Now, how is that happening? It's because of these solar panels. These solar panels are collecting energy from the sun and sending that DC electricity down through this combiner box where all the wires from these solar panels are combined, and then it sends it into our cabin, into the power room, where it charges our batteries. Let's go inside and see what our alternative energy system looks like. Here's our power room. As we built our alternative energy system, we built it in 3 different phases. Phase 1 consisted of a generator. Now, I don't recommend starting out with just a generator. Why? Because the only time you have electricity when you're using a generator is when that generator is running, and that can be very cost prohibitive. So as soon as we could afford it, we advanced to phase 2, and that's when the fun really began. We were able to purchase an Outback inverter charger, Outback DC disconnect, and then 4 L16 batteries, which made up a basic battery bank. Now, this is a basic alternative energy system. It's, I think, quite affordable. Now, what does this inverter, or I call it the brain of an alternative energy system, what does it do? As the generator is generating or creating AC electricity, this brain or inverter charger will take that AC electricity and convert it into a storable electricity called DC electricity. It sends it down to the batteries. Then when that generator goes off, within a nanosecond, this brain will reverse the flow of electricity and start pulling that stored DC electricity in the battery box up into this box, where it inverts it into 120 volts AC, which is the typical electricity used in your home. Then we were able to advance to stage 3, which included solar panels and a charge controller. I just showed you the solar panels. They are absolutely wonderful. Our electricity is free from the sun. And as we can afford it, we're going to buy more, so we'll get more of that free electricity. Here's our battery box. We have 4 L16 batteries in a battery box. I built the box large enough to be able to hold 8. Maybe someday we'll be able to have 8. You'll notice that I built the box where the lid is on a slope and the lid is hinged with a piano hinge. The reason I wanted to build this on a slope is because during the generation cycle, hydrogen gas is given off from the batteries, and it's lighter than air, so the gas will rise to the highest spot in the box, and then we have an exhaust fan that will pull that gas out into the outside.
In the summertime, I sometimes feel like I practically live outdoors. It is so nice and cool and balmy in the mornings, and then it gets sunny and warm in the middle of the day, cools off again in the evening. I spend quite a bit of time in the garden. I have a flower garden, a little cottage garden that I love to work on also. And come midsummer, I start huckleberry picking. Huckleberries are the first thing that becomes ripe in our area, and we have lots of huckleberries. Last summer I picked about 20 gallons of huckleberries and preserved most of them. Of course, we ate lots also while they were still fresh. After the huckleberries, we picked cherries, and our fruit trees are not producing yet. We have learned the hard way that you plant your fruit trees in full sun. And so last summer we cleared out an area that was about double the size of what our garden already was, and it was a big garden. And that extra area is going to be our orchard, and we planted 7 fruit trees there already, and we want to add to them. But they're not producing yet, and so we go to an orchard and we pick cherries. And if you've never picked cherries, it is an incredible experience. You just pick them by the handfuls. Your 5 or 6 gallon bucket is full before you know it, and they're so beautiful. And then I we eat them fresh, or I dehydrate them or can them. And I love canning cherries. They're just a joy. They're so simple to do. Then after the cherries come apricots, pears, peaches, and we have dear friends that usually give us apricots, and then they give us apples at the end of the summer. And I also can tomatoes. Most of the things that I can, that our family uses, are fruits and tomatoes. And all of these are very, very simple to can. They all use the water bath method, which it's not pressure canning. Pressure canning isn't really hard either, but the water bath is extremely simple. And so if at the end of the summer you're busy canning other things, you can store your apples. Apples store very, very well and last for months. And so then you can kind of eat on them during the winter or can them if you see you're going to have plenty. Our family likes applesauce. We love to have toast with homemade almond butter on it and then applesauce on top of that. So I have some apples that came from our friends. Their orchard is, they don't use harmful pesticides, so I feel very good about using their apples. And I just wash them. I'm going to can some today. I washed them already and quartered them and cooked them in a small amount of water. In a big pot like this, I used about, 1.5 to 2 cups of water with the apples in here. And they're all cooked and soft. This is called a Victorio strainer. It's a very simple device and it's not expensive, and it makes canning applesauce or any fruit butters very easy. It strains out all the seeds and the core material, so you do not have to take the time to peel or core things. You just quarter them, put them in here, and then I'm going to take a pot to catch the applesauce in. And here's a bowl. I'm going to put it here because this is where the seeds and the core material is going to come out. That'll make wonderful compost for our garden next summer. And I'll put my rings on. Now you'll probably hear a little sound that happens. It's kind of the fun part of canning, and it happens when the vacuum seal is formed. We'll see if we hear it pretty soon. There's a little bubble in these lids here, and when that is pulled in, it makes a certain sound that everybody who cans loves to hear that sound. It lets you know that you've been successful. Close the door gently, and I'm going to put the timer on for 30 minutes. What can I say? They're done.
Mabel, this way. Come here, pretty girl. Come on. Hi there. We forgot to bring you apples. Maybe we should have brought you some apples and oats.
We wanted to be in the mountains. And like many people who want to move, who want to make that move, we didn't have the means, we didn't have the resources. And what we decided to start doing is downsizing and packing. You know, when you want to do something, you have to start working on it. So we started downsizing, packing and looking, but all the property we saw, you know we couldn't afford it. But anyway, we were still doing it because we know that the Lord will provide for us somehow, and we knew that was His will. So one Friday afternoon, we were all in the yard. It was a family project. We were bringing in clothes from the line, myself and Denise and the children. And I thought about it and I said, honey, you know, we don't have the means to make this move, but God has it. Let us ask Him. So we got down on our knees right there in the yard, and our prayer was, Lord, we want to head to the mountains. You know we don't have the means to make the journey, we don't have the means to make the move, but we know you own everything, and we trust in you to make a way for us. And that Sunday morning, about 7:30, the phone rang, and I was wondering who would be calling so early. Usually people would not call that early on a Sunday morning. And the person on the other end of the line said, good morning, are you ready to move to Montana? Well, you know, a question like that usually comes when there are plans in the making, but there was no plans. And so I hesitated for a few seconds and I said, yes. And then I said, well, fill me in on the details. What are you talking about? Well, it so happened there was this family who was, they were house sitting. And while they were looking for property, eventually they found some property and they needed another family to replace them. And we were recommended. So anyway, we spoke to the folks, agreed that we were going to make the trip, etc. But again, so it was 3,000 miles, a 4-day journey, 4 or 5-day journey. Yeah. And you know what that required? A vehicle, a reliable vehicle, money to travel, money for hotels, etc., etc. So our next prayer was, Lord, if it's in your will, if this is your plan, then we need such and such and such. Well, a few days later, we got a call. Someone called and asked for my wife's full name and address. And the person said, I would like to, the Lord has blessed me, and I would like to share some of that with you folks. Well, before I could ask any questions, I heard click. She hung up. And a few days later, we received most of the money that we needed for our journey in the mail. And I think by the end of 3 weeks or so, we had everything and we were ready to make the journey.
Yes. Do you want some? He's the driver.
Now, this is our fuel for heating and also for cooking.
Yes.
And it costs us nothing but a little effort. Well, of course, we use a chainsaw to cut it down, and that requires a little fuel, but nevertheless, it is nowhere the amount it will cost us for heating and cooking if we were living in the city. Okay. Okay. Now this wood here, this amount here, will keep us warm through the night and will get our breakfast going. And so it doesn't require a lot of wood to heat nor to cook with. I will say roughly about $30 a year for gas for the chainsaw for cutting the wood. And if you need an extra chain or sharpen the chain. And if you want to go higher, you can save not more than $50. The chainsaw doesn't require a lot of gas for powering the saw and cutting the trees and cutting the wood. You really don't use a lot of gas for that. So even if you want to go $100, that would be 1 year's cost for heating and cooking. And I like that. It means I can spend more time with my family, enjoying the things that we can enjoy out here in the country as we work together.
This whole field out here, This is part of what we are renting right now. We are just renters. We had a wonderful summer. This was all alfalfa.
Yeah.
Alfalfa growing out here to this tall as far as you could see. It was all alfalfa to the back of those trees, acres and acres of alfalfa. And someone that has machinery helped us cut it. And we did some haying. And it was a wonderful father and son project. I would say Mommy provided the water and stayed nearby and encouraged them because hay is heavy.
Very heavy.
But it was wonderful. And we, you know, brought it in and stacked it up in the barn before the rains came so that the horses and people with other farm animals could have the hay for them when the ground became covered with snow. So that's another industry. People wonder, oh, how am I going to make it out here? Well, you don't need the amount of money that you need in Brooklyn, New York.
You might be wondering why, what's said about this area for storing food? Well, this is actually what we call our refrigerator. That we pay no fuel for. It's down here in the basement. We have our water down here, and we have our cooling area also where we store our food.
Yes.
And
it stays nice and cool year-round. It's not as cold in the warmer months, but it's cool enough to keep your fresh produce from going bad. And over here, all this food that you see here was wonderful things that I learned just this summer.
Yes, you just learned to can.
Yes.
This is just our landing ground. This is not permanent. And you know, there are things that the Lord has opened. He has brought us here, and He's already begun to open doors for us to have a more permanent situation. And again, with very limited resources, but a lot of trust in God's promises.
Thomas Jefferson's dream for his new country was an agrarian economy with just enough cities to provide the manufacturing necessary to support the agriculture. He wanted that because he didn't want his new country to be blighted by the problems that cities had in the countries that he came from. Oh, could he be resurrected and see us now? We have become exactly what he didn't want, and that is a largely urban society. Now, less than 1 person out of 50 provides the food for the rest. What a tragedy. I think that there are moral and spiritual values to living close to the soil.
Hi, I'm Edwin, and this is my brother John, and we want to welcome you to Bountiful Blessings Farm.
We really are bountifully blessed to have this farm, our small organic farm here nestled in the hills of Middle Tennessee, where we farm just under 4 acres. And if you look behind us, you can see part of that. You can see some of our hoop houses and the winter fields snuggled under their blankets. And then in the distance across the road, you may be able to see some of our summer fields. That's where we grow our sweet potatoes and Irish potatoes and winter squash. But this is our life, and we want to share it with you.
We're not only growing vegetables on the farm here, we're also growing families. My family, I have 3 grown children. The eldest is married, but they're all here on the farm with us, and that's really, really exciting to me. John has 4 children. They're all here. Our parents are here. And we have 4 generations on the farm. We just feel so blessed to be able to to be here on the farm, to have this life, this occupation, this lifestyle, and we're just so happy that we have this chance to share the blessing with you as well, and we hope that you're blessed.
And we hope that maybe you will be inspired, if nothing else, to grow your own garden year-round. We believe it can be done almost anywhere in this country year-round. But then maybe even some of you might be inspired to go into this as an occupation. We would love to see more Christian farmers out there sharing what the Lord teaches them on the farm with those around them.
Living the life that God gave Adam to live.
So we invite you to join us as we take you around the farm and share what the Lord has been teaching us here.
Certainly we feel that the Lord led us to this property 14 years ago. We set up household here, my wife and I alone. We had dreams of children joining us and how the Lord is blessed. You can see that our quiver is quite full, and most of them right here on the farm.
We got into this later in life, never dreaming that we would do this. My wife and I are both teachers by profession and felt a calling to education and youth ministry. But when our children came along, we felt the Lord calling us to do something a little different, where we could invest more time in our children. And through a series of miraculous leadings, we ended up here doing this, and we have no regrets. It's been a very difficult learning experience, learning from scratch. You know, we knew nothing about gardening, and it's been a hard time. You know, financially, things have not been easy, but I think you could ask any one of our family members and none of them would trade it for anything. Our children love the farm. This is their favorite place to be on earth. They don't ever want, well, they would rather people come visit us than us go anywhere, because there's more to do here. They enjoy it more. Anyway, it's just a wonderful life, you know, having said that it's hard and difficult, but it's also wonderful. And to walk into a greenhouse like this on a cold winter day is very therapeutic. And as a book we have is aptly titled, Walking into Spring. You walk through the door and it's like walking into spring. So it's lots of fun to work in here when the weather's cold outside and dreary. And it's a wonderful place to commune with the Lord. We believe that in the last days, the Lord is calling us to a life like Enoch had, and one thing that we know about his life was that he had a lot of time in solitude with God. And I used to wonder how he could take that time, and it finally hit me that he was probably a farmer, and his solitude with God was in his work. And so that's inspiring and encouraging to me, that I can be communing with God and having solitude with him even in my breadwinning. So I recommend it.
Okay, this is our life source for our farm. This is our spring. we have a little collection box there that collects the water. We have a 2-inch line that takes it down to a holding tank here. And the runoff that is not collected in the box forms a little creek, and it goes down to a pond that we're going to show you in just a minute. And then we irrigate from the pond. The water that we collect from the spring box here in this 2-inch line is the water that we use for our houses. It's actually providing water for 4 households on the farm. This is our pond here. We feel really, really blessed to have this pond. It was on the property when we bought it. But it's a very well-designed pond. Somebody's told us that it was made by the Army Corps of Engineers. We're not really certain about that. But you can see we've made a few improvements to the pond. We have that floating dock, and you see this cable. There's a cable that goes across the pond, and you can see a yellow thing hanging from it. That's a real important innovation to us. That's part of it's a cooling system for farm workers. The way this cooling system works is you can see a platform over here right under a tree. You just climb up the steps on that platform and wrap your legs around this yellow disc that's hanging from the line over here that'll be pulled up there to the platform, and you sit on it and you launch and you ride through the air until you're over the pond in the right spot, and then you let go. And it's a lot of fun.
We have lots of fun times too, like playing soccer and riding wagons down the hills.
In the summertime, swimming in the pond.
Yeah.
Going off the zip line.
In the country, there's a whole lot less juvenile delinquency. Carrying out the trash, kids are bright. They understand that's not meaningful work. If that's all you have to do is carry out the trash, that really isn't a meaningful contribution to your family.
Well, we're learning young here.
And I think that we have more juvenile delinquency because more of our people live in cities.
The beauty of agriculture is that it really challenges you in many areas, and I think as a young person, young people need to be challenged in life, and to have the neat thing about agriculture is you have to use your mind and talents in many ways. Even if you think you don't have very many talents, you develop talents here. And so that's beautiful, and you use so much of what you've learned, like math and science and biology and chemistry, all sorts of different things. Everything is combined on the farm, and so it's exciting because you realize things you've learned in school actually can be applied in real day-to-day life.
Another main reason that I chose to come to the farm is family connectedness, because I saw in our world how families have been so pulled apart and dispersed and so unconnected, and the results of that. And so that was one of the main reasons is I desired to have that family connectedness. And for anyone that's wondering, I'd like to say that Having a connected family is one of the greatest joys that you can have in life, but it takes effort.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that when I was thinking about coming to the farm, I was really praying about what God would have me do with my life and my future. And one of the things the Lord really laid on my heart was a need to develop a really close relationship with my father, and the importance of that father-daughter relationship. And I was really inspired to come back and work alongside my dad and to have his visions become my visions, and to learn to cooperate with him and learn the role of a true woman of God in the family circle.
I say that it's really amazing to have your kids working beside you, because Caroline puts on a lot of meals, especially breakfasts, and helps, and I know that Pam's kids help her tremendously, and it makes everything possible when the kids are part of the family firm for things to run smoothly.
One thing that I have, I guess has been a bit of a struggle, is that in the early years when it was just our family, and I was very involved with the workings of the farm and trying to homeschool and being a teacher, I sort of had that preconceived idea of what homeschool should look like. And it was really just bringing school home. And it really took me a long time to realize that when life is an education, it's a much more balanced approach. And the book work has been a lesser part of our life than the practical work. But as the children grow older, I'm really seeing the fruits and the blessing of that in their ability to problem solve, like the carrot washer. And just that farm life provides a really excellent education.
There's so many distractions in the world today that, you know, out here you don't have those distractions. So you can get, you know, closer together as a family. You can spend the time with God that you need to. Just all around, I highly recommend it.
And with the way things are going in our world today, we never know when we're going to come up on a time when we cannot provide for ourselves, even in the city. If your electricity goes out, how are you going to stay warm? A lot of cities don't allow you to burn wood. What are you going to do? And when you're out here like this, you have hope of being able to still survive. It'll be a lot of work, but you can do it with the Lord's help. And He gave us in the beginning the ground to till, and we're just going back to our roots.
This is our pump house. We've put it in the ground so that it won't ever, or it won't, generally it won't freeze because it's down below the frost. That's our 12-volt pump that's running down here, straight down. And it will run off these solar panels right here when the sun's shining. And if we have a lot of cloudy weather like we have in the wintertime, we've got a switch in the house we can just flip on and it runs off the batteries. We also have a 110-volt pump, which is what we originally were using in here before we got the 12-volt. And I just left it hooked up. I've got a couple of valves I can switch, so if we run a generator or if something went bad with the other pump, we can run that 110-volt pump. What it's doing, it's pulling our water. Our water is about 400 feet, our spring is about 400 feet away, and we've got a 2,000-gallon cistern in the ground, and it's about a quarter. Our spring puts out about a quarter of a gallon a minute, so it's not a lot, but with the cistern we've got plenty of water because 24 hours a day it fills that tank. And then this is pumping it, it's pulling it from the cistern, and then it's going up on the hill about 85 feet elevation above us, and we have another tank up there, about a 1,200-gallon tank. So we can fill the tank up on the hill, and then if we don't have sun for a while or and it doesn't pump, then we've got gravity flow until we get low, and then we can pump it again. If we have to, we can run the generator, or the 12-volt pump runs directly off our batteries. The other one will run off of our inverter or off our generator. One thing I like about living out here, a lot of times in this area, especially in this area, I mean, I'm sure other areas have the same problems, but the power goes out, Well, one thing we can say where we're living, our power never goes out because we own the power company. Yeah, I guess it was last summer we just bought these 6 solar panels. It's 1,080 watts. And I built my own frames out of bed frames. So they're adjustable. Right now they're almost straight up and down so the snow doesn't stick to them too well. In the summertime we'll lean them back quite a bit. Since we put those solar panels up though, they really made a huge difference. Also, when I was designing this house, adding on to it, back over here by where that vent comes up, you see a couple of water things coming up. That's for my solar hot water eventually. Since it's winter time here right now, about the most sun we have in a good day, if it's sunny all day, is about 2 hours at about this time of year. And the sun, being we're clear north here, the sun is pretty low on the horizon, so that's another reason we have those solar panels almost straight up and down, because the sun's just out here. We've had a little bit of sun here this month, not all day, but a little enough, and it's we've only had to run our generator. I think it's probably been about 2 weeks ago, probably since 2 or 3 weeks ago since we ran it. So they're actually keeping up, the batteries. In the summertime, we didn't have to run our generator at all. Didn't even run it once. Here we are down in our root cellar. This is nature's refrigerator. Right now it's 39 degrees. We have also have a thermometer up above that tells us our temperature without even coming down here and in our humidity. But here we have apples. Keeps them nice and fresh. We've got potatoes. Well, here's some onions. We've got carrots and potatoes over here. We've got lots of apples. We also use this as a refrigerator for keeping milk or whatever you need to keep cold, because it's cold enough right now. So we use this in the winter time. Nothing freezes, but it keeps about the same temperature between 38 and 42. And it's pretty well an essential thing to have when you're needing to store produce.
Cabin needed a lot of work. It was just a shell, but Randy he'd done a little bit of stuff here and there, but not much. He'd never built cabinets before, and as you can see, he built the cabinets and they look beautiful, and we've just put a lot of hard work and elbow grease, but you can do it. And if you have some friends that can help you out and give you some pointers here and there, I think just about anybody can do it. It's just a lot of work, and the whole family, we did it all. We all did it.
Yeah, it was just it was like 24 by 32 cabin shell. It was insulated and it had sheetrock, but it wasn't taped, and some little bitty windows, and just kind of dark. And so we shopped around and we bought a lot of windows for just next to nothing that were, you know, maybe had been ordered but weren't used or something, and we got them cheap and nice big windows, and we just went through it and remodeled and taped and textured, added a bedroom. It was just one room. And then later we actually added on an addition with another bedroom and a bathroom and office area and laundry, and it's a lot of work, but a lot of fun just designing it and changing our designs.
A lot of times.
A lot of times. And we're really happy with it. We're really glad to be out like this.
It's been a blessing from the Lord.
Yeah.
We're going to be canning some green beans. You use a pressure canner for green beans. We already have the pressure canner set up with 2 quarts of water in it, but each pressure canner is a little different. You'll just read in your instructions. It'll tell you how much water to put in. I have my son helping me. He's been doing this since he was 3 years old, and he's 12, so he'll be fine. He's going to fill the jars, and then I'll get them ready to can, and you'll see how simple it is. You just tap the green beans down in the jar so you get it good and full. Then I have boiling water, and I'm filling it with boiling water. First you'll put, if you're doing pints like we are, you put a ½ teaspoon of salt in. You don't have to put any in, but that's how we usually do it. Pour the boiling water over the top. Wipe the rim really good to make sure that there's no particles of salt or anything on it. Put the lid on. Get a ring, put the ring on. And you don't want to put it really, really tight, just until it's on there. And then we put it back here in the canner. Okay, we're going to put the last jar in the bottom. We're going to put this on so that we can put the next row on top, and we only have one more jar. Now, this is a canner has got the gasket, and this gasket is an older gasket, but I found that I can get it to seal just fine if I soak it in some hot water before I put it on there. So I just soak it in hot water, get it warm, stick it up on top. There's things where you line up the top, you turn it. This is a Miro pressure canner, and instead of having the gauge that you have to sit there and watch, this one has on its little rocker here, it has a 5-pound, 10-pound, and 15-pound pressure. You'll look in your book, it will tell you what pressure you need to use for the elevation that you're at, and then you will stick it on where you need to be. For here, I need to be at 15 pounds pressure. For green beans, at 3,000 feet elevation, and turn the heat on to high, and then we wait until it comes to a rock. It takes about 20 minutes until it comes to a rock, and then we let it rock for 20 minutes. This jar that we had that cracked, I set it in the sink so that when the water was draining out of it, that it wouldn't go all over the counter. All we do with these beans, they could have some glass particles in them, so we're just going to throw those beans away and put them on your compost pile to fertilize your garden next year. And that's it until it rocks. Okay, the canner has now started rocking. You can hear it jiggling every little bit, and you will follow the instructions for your particular canner. It will tell you how many rocks it needs to rock in a minute and how you need to, what temperature to set it at, and that's all you do. Okay, our timer went off. Now we're going to turn off the heat to our canner, and we're going to let the pressure go down on it, and then we'll remove the jars and we'll get to see the fruits of our labor. Okay, the pressure's gone off the canner now. We can tell because we push on this little pressure spot on the top, and it doesn't let off any steam when we push down on it. It's flat against the top. We can remove this, no steam comes out, and the lock is off of the canner so that we can open it, because when the steam is on this particular canner, when there's steam in it, it locks and you can't open it. So we'll remove the lid, and here's our first jar of green beans. Everything's hot, so I'm using a jar lifter. You can buy at a canning supply store or probably your hardware store. And we'll put the jars over here. Don't they look nice? I love to look at the fruits of your labor all shining in the jars. It took about probably 30 to 40 minutes for the pressure to go off on the canner, so you can expect it'll take a while. You don't want to speed up the process by putting it in a cool place or anything like that, because if you do, you'll boil more water out of your jars. So just let it take its time. It'll be worth it when it's done. And here are the fruits of our labors from all our hard work. There's nearly 1,000 jars here, and we can easily use that up, through a season until the next harvest. And we've got pears and applesauce, nectarine sauce, tomatoes, nectarines up there, pear juice over there. Pear juice is great for using in different things. We have peaches. I even tried some eggplant this year. Green beans. This is what we just did. We've got some carrots and cherries, and then we even have wild mushrooms. And a lot of this produce that we got, we were able to glean this year. A lot of the orchards If it's a large orchard, they go in, they get some stuff, and then they get what they want. But if it's not just the right size or has maybe a tiny little blemish on it, they won't keep it, and they won't sell it. And so we can go in and we got most of this fruit just cost our time and gas to go pick it up. And it's a lot of work, but it's so worth it.
If I had a choice between my old home, it was suburbs. It wasn't too near the city. Or here out in the boondocks or the sticks. I'd pick out here in the boondocks or the sticks.
Never get tired of that view. Another one of God's gifts. Haven't always lived out in the mountains, but have for several years now, and been living with family, and it was like I came to the realization that the time had come to get my own place, and there was one slight problem though. I was totally invested in other projects that I'd been working on and didn't have any money to speak of to get it. And there's something that I've learned for the last several years, that when you hear God calling you to do something, you don't let a lack of resources hinder you from doing that. And so I decided that even though I didn't have any money to buy a place with, I would go ahead and start looking. And so I went out and even looked at properties and everything, all of this with virtually no money that I could purchase a piece of property with. And the Lord has amazing ways of doing things. This place that you see here is a miracle place for me, because the Lord has provided this place, at least for now, with me having virtually no resources. I'd heard about this place, that it was for rent, and I really wasn't terribly interested in renting because it's such a temporary situation, and I was looking for something that's more long-term. And so I approached the owner and asked if the owner might be interested in doing a lease, more of a long-term lease, and the owner was interested. And so the bottom line is, with virtually no resources, I have a place, at least for now. You know, it's not as good as owning, but when you don't have the money to buy a place, I'm not complaining. And so I virtually have a place now, at least for the time being, and what a blessing. I just
what a blessing to be in the mountains, out in the quiet, where you can hear God's voice. Well, here we have the wood cook stove. This, to me, is one of the most important pieces of equipment on a homestead. Wood cook stove is so multi-purpose. Not only does it heat your house, but also you can cook your food on it if you need to. Some people like cooking on it even now, and I don't mind doing that, although I'm not much of a cook, so I don't do a whole lot of cooking, but I've used it for simple things like toasting bread and things like that, and I plan on learning to use it even more. But it's excellent to have it as a backup. I do have a propane stove that I can use now for the time being, whenever I want to, but really in the wintertime when I have this thing fired up anyway, might as well use this. And then also I can use it to heat my hot water. And take a look at this range boiler over here. I got this, once again, I'm not even living here right now because I just acquired this place this fall, and my work takes me on the road quite a bit in the wintertime, so I haven't had a chance to get it fixed up to where it's livable. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but not a tremendous amount of things to do. But there are some things here and there, like the hot water system needs to be hooked up. But I have my range boiler. I brought it in this fall, and the way this works is there's a water coil inside the firebox that heats up the water, and it starts what is called a thermosiphon, where the water just naturally circulates and keeps this entire 40-gallon tank of water nice and hot whenever this stove is going. So that will be my hot water system, and I just am really happy with the wood cook stove. This, may not be the ultimate wood cook stove, but it's been working for me fine so far. I want to be in the peaceful, quiet environment as close as possible to the way that God created us in the Garden of Eden, out in the quiet where we can hear His voice. But there's another reason that is a very important reason, I believe, why I've decided to do this. And it has to do with the predictions in the Bible of what is going to take place in the book of Revelation, particularly relating to our day right now. And we read in Revelation chapter 13 about there's coming a time when no man will be able to buy or sell save he that had the mark of the beast. And when I read that, it brings some very interesting issues to my mind, because I think about how most of America is set up today, where we are totally dependent for our every necessity of life, for our heat, for our water, for our food, for these basic necessities. And I think about how people lived back 100 years ago. They lived totally different. Most of the people were in a rural environment, and they took care of these basic necessities. They had their own independent water system. They had their own heat system. They used wood. And of course, with their water system, they had some sort of, drop a bucket down their well, or a spring or a creek or something like this. And of course, they grew their own food, most of them canned a lot, preserved. And so I've been thinking about these things, and it seems to me like a house of cards right now, America, just ready at the slightest interruption, whenever the right interruption comes, to interrupt the major infrastructure in this country. It's just going to fall like a house of cards. And so I see that coming with disasters potentially, but even more importantly than that, I see what we know is going to take place, because the Bible has predicted that if we are true to God, we are not going to be able to buy or sell. And that is concerning to me, because I believe that that is a call that God is giving us, that we need to be preparing for these issues that are ahead. One of the things I need to work on is my well over here, and it has a pump in it that's not the right size, and so I'll be putting in a very efficient water pump that will run off of my alternative energy system and give me a good water setup that uses not very much electricity. And there's all kinds of different options that I'm looking into for doing that. We have a duty to our family, but we also have a duty to others. And so this is not a thing about me and mine. This is about doing the part that God has given us, doing our human part, and doing our part to prepare for others, so that those who are less fortunate or may have not had access to the same information that we have had access to, so that we will be able to prepare for them. One of the things I really like about living out here is this is where it's happening. Instead of having to travel somewhere to go backpacking or to go canoeing or this or that, I'm here. I mean, I'm just several miles from what I think is one of the most gorgeous lakes in this country. And we go canoeing there every summer, or we try to. Sometimes we go more often than once. And, you know, there's excellent backpacking and rock climbing and of course skiing. I mean, all winter long, got wonderful skiing opportunities. And so it's an incredible opportunity to just practically live in nature. And I'm just so thankful for this opportunity, and I'm thankful so much for the opportunity that God has given me with this place here. I'm looking forward to the challenges of getting it fixed up and doing my part to be part of the solution.
When we first thought about leaving the city and leaving, we had actually a fairly nice situation. We had a home, nice home, we were close to the beach. We really felt like we had it made, and we were actually talking and looking at getting a bigger house and getting an ocean view and all these things. And then as we kind of saw the events going on and we started reading more and just deciding that, you know, maybe it'd be nice to have a system where you could be independent, where you didn't have to depend on, you know, trucks and city water and city electricity and all those types of, you know, infrastructure. Wouldn't it be cool to have a place where you could have everything, you know, self-sufficient? So this is our spring box here, and we're in a dried creek bed here. In the spring, this is really flowing as the snow is melting. There's a lot of water here. Right now, it doesn't look like there's much here, but there's actually water underground, and this spring box actually extends down far enough to where it's able to capture that underground water. And this is able to provide us with more than enough water for household use as well as for irrigation of some of the plants we have. And we have a hydro that in the spring is able to take water from this. Right now, because we're at low water levels, we're not able to use it, but hopefully in a couple months here we'll get enough water and we'll be able to use that as well. So this is our water cistern or water reservoir right here. So the water goes from the spring box and flows here. There's a valve that controls the inflow to this, and then it flows into the cistern here. So this is the water reservoir, and as you can see, we've used water for irrigation, so the level's down a little bit, but it'll come back up. That's where the water flows into and is stored here, and from here it can go to all the places we need it at the house. Whether it goes to the house or whether it goes to the water spigots that we have out in our garden area, or whether it goes to the hydro, it all comes from here. So we've walked down the hill where our water cistern is, and as you can tell, the house side is over here. And so that difference in elevation gives us enough pressure.
This water comes from the spring up on the hill that you just saw. The pressure is provided by gravity, and we don't need any electricity to run our faucets, our toilets, our showers, which makes everything much easier. And the best part about it is the taste. No chlorine, no fluoride, no bacteria. This is wonderful.
So you see all that pressure there. There's no pumps or anything. That pressure is strictly due to gravity flow. Obviously the holding tank is above the level of our garden area here, and so the nice pressure you see there is due to the difference in height.
And it's fun work. It's work that you do yourself, and it's really relaxing. I mean, chopping wood is relaxing. Doing anything outside, planting trees, planting the garden, working in the garden, it's all relaxing.
That's true. A friend of mine once, talked about, getting out of the city, and he said, yeah, and we could put up a little gym. And I kind of laughed. I'm like, a gym? You don't need a gym out here. Because, when we're chopping wood and loading the wood into the truck and then putting it into our little, wood shed there, and, we're digging holes and putting trees in there and planting. I mean, it's so fun. And actually, it's so rewarding. We came from the city very much. We both grew up in the city, and we pretty much thought we were going to always live in the city, but there's just something magical about taking like a seed and planting it, and then we're not very good at gardening, and we probably made a lot of mistakes, but just watching it grow and produce a fruit, it's just incredible. And then eating it, you appreciate it so much more. We're like, wow.
We don't throw away food anymore. You learn that.
Paid $5 for one of those yesterday.
And I also think it's easier to feel closer to the Lord when you're in this kind of a environment, when there's nature all around you. It's so easy to just go outside and think, who created all this? And this is all for me to enjoy. Whereas in the city, all you see is cars and freeways, and that doesn't really lead your thoughts to heaven. It kind of keeps you level. But when you're out in nature, you just start looking up, and then you think about Christ.
So we're standing in the room here of our micro hydro. As you can tell, the water comes in from our holding cistern up at the top of the hill there. It goes through this pressure gauge here. As you can tell, we have about 45 pounds per square inch pressure. It goes through this tube and into the Harris micro hydro generator. And actually what this is this water jet over here. It strikes the Pelton wheel and spins this, and this alternator here, which is actually an alternator from an automobile, this alternator here at the top creates the electricity, and it goes to the transformer here and then goes up to the house. So this is our micro hydro system, and this creates about 2.5 amps at 48 volts, so this gives us about 125 watts. So we're standing here below the solar panels. As you can see, there's 10 separate solar panels here. From the house, it looks really small, but when you get up to it, you actually see how big the structure actually is. And it's actually high enough off the ground because in the winter you may get snow that comes quite a bit ways up here. It could be 5 or 6 feet up. So the panels have to be up higher in order to be above the level of the snow in the winter. And also it's at a fairly steep angle, so generally when the sun hits the solar panels, any ice that may have been formed on there or snow usually melts off and slides right off to the area right in front of the panels here. These 10 panels are all wired together and go into this combiner box, which obviously combines the wires and makes the wires from the 10 panels go into these 2 wires which go over to the house. Each panel is 110 watts. And during peak sunlight, you can get up to 1100 watts, which is quite a bit of power and more than enough to charge the batteries and to power most devices which you'd want to use in your home. So this is our main source of energy right here, which is our solar panels. So we're on the side of the shop here, on the side away from the house, so it reduces the noise coming from it. And this is a Perkins diesel engine that is our generator and is one other source of power. So say we have several cloudy days and just don't have enough power, or say we're using some power tools or things that require more electricity, we can turn this guy on and we can charge up our batteries or run whatever power tools, compressors, anything we need. And when you turn the switch to auto, it starts a series of relays that warm up the glow plugs automatically. So it automatically decides on how long the glow plugs need to work on, and it just turns everything on automatically. I'm no diesel mechanic, but I am capable of flipping the switch and this thing just starts right up and gives us all the power that we need. So we're standing in our power room here, and this is the room where all the electricity from the hydro, from the solar panels, and from the generator, it all converges in this place. This is where it all happens, okay? So you got the solar panels are going into this little box here. It's called a maximum power point tracker. You can see right now we're producing 11 amps. So that's a 48 volt system. So that's over 500 watts that we're putting out right now from the solar panels, and that electricity is going through this device into the batteries that are underneath here. So here we've actually got 16 batteries that store all the electricity for the house, and all these devices here, they help control that. Now this system may seem a little overwhelming at first, and it was to us. We didn't put the system together. We bought the house, and that was one of the selling points to us, that it came with all this stuff ready installed. But and this system may be more than most people need, in that it has, you know, more inputs and more devices, and some of these things are a little bit bigger than your standards. This is actually a 48 volt system. So, and you can get a 12, 24, or 48. So this is actually one of the bigger systems. But you know, with a little bit of time and a little bit of studying, you know, everything actually kind of comes together. You understand, well, electricity comes in through there, it goes through here, and it goes into the batteries. Everything starts to make sense. Now, that's not something that will happen instantly. It may take a little bit of living with it and playing and talking to people, and then you may have a little problem or two, and you may need to problem solve it, and in the process of doing that, you start learning what all the different buttons do and what all the different settings do. You know, part of the fun of this is my wife and I, we actually now can tell you how many amps every single device we have hold, how much it takes. This little meter here, and we have 2 of them, there's one upstairs too, you can tell your battery's full and what the volts of the whole system are. This little number here, the 4.9 amps, that's net into the system. We've got 4 amps going in. And as you have your own solar systems, and as both my wife and I, we each look, and every time we plug something in, we see how much electricity, you become much more conscious. When we lived in the city and we were completely on the grid, we'd turn things on and off, we never twice thought about how much electricity they're wasting. Well, you know, when you start getting an off-grid system, you start thinking more carefully. You start turning the lights off when you leave the room. And I just think those are just good general habits to have. And that's one of the other fun parts that we've learned about living off the grid, is we only have the devices on that we need.
Yeah, we enjoy being by ourselves. We enjoy being out here with no neighbors close by and all that. But that doesn't mean that's all we do. That doesn't mean we're just by ourselves. In fact, we love to entertain, and almost every weekend we have people over. We enjoy that very much, and we like to show people how we live and encourage people that it is possible to live like this. And we do enjoy having people over, so we are not hermits by any means.
Well, I know some people think you'll just move out to the hills and just become a hermit. No, that's not the point of this. We interact with, dozens and hundreds of people every day and week, but it's so nice to have this little safe haven, our little getaway where, at the end of the day, you can come out here, or you can choose to invite and who you want to spend time with. Because I think we all need that time, and that's something I noticed when I was in the city. It really was a lot harder to just relax, because there's always, you look out the window, you hear traffic, you hear honking, there's ambulances, sirens, airplanes flying above you, cars screeching, neighbors talking. You just see the hustle and bustle of the city, and that affects you. And it's just nice to be somewhere where everything is just peaceful.
This whole venture for us was based on total trust in God.
Gives you an opportunity to jump off that treadmill and really be able to slow down so you can hear God's voice and hear what He's talking to you, and I'd never go back.
We wouldn't trade this for any, mega $1 million house on the ocean front, because I think our lifestyle is better than those of any people.
And I want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
It's patriotic to be as little dependent on the system as you can, because then in an emergency you're not going to be a liability, you'll be an asset. And if you're planning for a future, you ought to plan for a future where you're going to the extent you can, share your good fortune with someone else. So it's a patriotic thing to do, and certainly in terms of your club or your church, where you have a circle of friends that you would like to make sure are secure and safe, and your family. So at whatever level you're concentrating on, being as self-sufficient as you can, as quickly as you can, is going to be the right thing to do.
I really like heating with wood. When we left the city years ago, we left the rat race. We moved to the country, to the mountains, because we were wanting to become more independent from the systems of the world. Living in the city was insanity, where we were dependent on everyone else for every basic necessity of life. Out here in the mountains in the country, we have our own independent wood supply in the form of trees. This is wonderful. I really like heating with wood. There's nothing like backing up to this wood stove. When you really want to get warm, then you can pull away when you get warm enough. We also have our independent water supply from a water source here on this property. And in the summertime, we'll be getting our food from the garden. And as our orchards develop, we'll be getting our food from them. My wife will take the harvest and can that food so we can eat it all during the wintertime till the next harvest. Out here in the country and in the mountains, you really can fully understand that text in the Bible where it says, "Be still and know that He is God." Another reason why I like being out here in the country in the mountains is because of what I read in the book of Revelation, particularly chapter 13. Those who will obey God will not be able to buy or sell. Those who will obey God, that means keeping His law. That means keeping all of His law, including the fourth commandment. And when you can't buy or sell, it will be a lot better to have your own independent water, your own independent food supply, your own independent heat supply. Yes, I really like being out here.
So with the great majority of the best and noblest men of all ages. Read the history of Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, of Moses, David, and Elisha. Study the lives of men of later times who have most worthily filled positions of trust and responsibility. How many of these were reared in country homes? They knew little of luxury. They did not spend their youth in amusement. Many were forced to struggle with poverty and hardship. They early learned to work, and their active life in the open air gave vigor and elasticity to all their faculties. Forced to depend upon their own resources, they learned to combat difficulties and to surmount obstacles, and they gained courage and perseverance. They learned the lessons of self-reliance and self-control. Sheltered in a great degree from evil associations, they were satisfied with natural pleasures and wholesome companionships. They were simple in their tastes and temperate in their habits. They were governed by principle, and they grew up pure and strong and true. When called to their life work, they brought to it physical and mental power, buoyancy of spirit, ability to plan and execute, and steadfastness in resisting evil that made them a positive power for good in the world.